Well, hello and welcome to the first in a series of Torque 3D video tutorials geared towards helping you be able to create a first-person shooter in Torque 3D. So what we're looking at here is just a basic blank project. If you start Torque 3D Toolbox and click on New Project, and make sure that you use the full template. Once your template has been created, you get a little loading bar. It takes a little bit of time. After that's been created, select that. Make sure you click on empty terrain. There'll be a box there. You can choose empty room or empty terrain. Choose empty terrain, and then click on world editor, and it will open you up here in the world editor. The first thing that we want to do in the world editor is just kind of get used to navigating it. So there's two cameras that you need to be worried about in Torque. Worried isn't the right word. Two cameras about which you should be concerned. The first one is the default camera, which is the free fly observer camera. You'll notice that at first you have the mouse icon on the screen, which allows you to interact with the GUI, which is very important for building your game space. But if I want to move around in the world, I need to hold down the right mouse button, and that will allow me to free look, and WASD keys will allow me to move. When you're in the free fly observer camera mode, your camera speed can be controlled by this slider up here. So if I need to make some very fine changes, I can move my camera speed to be very low, and then I'll move nice and slowly. I'll be able to make some very fine changes. And if I need to cross terrain very quickly, I can move it up very high. I'm going to leave it right about in the middle at the default speed. You also have the ability to run around as the player character. So in order to switch cameras, there's two ways you can do it. The hotkey is Alt-C, and that allows me to run around as the player. You can see now I'm in first person mode. Again, I have to hold down the right mouse button to hide my cursor and allow me to play the game. And yes, the left mouse will actually fire, which is pretty nice. You can actually shoot stuff already. But there's two cameras for the player character mode. This is the first person camera, and if I'm still holding down the right mouse button, I hit tab, it'll tab me out and toggle to the third person camera mode. So there's two cameras. There's one for the player and one for the free floating camera, your observer camera. And when you're in player mode, you have first person and third person mode, which you can tap. One of the things that's a little bit disorienting to new users of Torque is if I'm in the camera mode, I have to hold down the right mouse button in order to toggle between first and third person. In order to use Alt-C to switch between cameras, I need to make sure I'm not holding down the right mouse button. So Alt-C, when I'm not holding down the right mouse button, will switch between the player and the observer cam. You can also switch cameras up here. Under the camera menu is toggle camera. So now that we know how to look around and move around a little bit, there's a couple other things that we need to know. First of all, if I'm way over here and I've been working on something over here for a while in my design and I need to get back to the player, there's a couple ways I can do it. Obviously I can move all the way over there. Also under the camera menu, there's place camera at player, which is Alt-Q. I usually use the keyboard shortcuts. Hit Alt-Q and it drops the camera at the player. Now this didn't put me in first person camera mode, it just put the camera where the player is, which is very helpful. One of the other things that can happen when you're working with your terrain is you can accidentally either move the terrain up above your character or drop your character below the terrain, in which case he falls into oblivion, he or she falls into oblivion, and you might want to place your character in a place where you can run around as them, and that is place your player at camera or Alt-W. If I do that, it places the player at the camera, and now I'm in my player camera mode. So those are two things that are very, very helpful when you're working in Torque space. So the first thing we're going to look at is the terrain editor. It's actually pretty simple to use. Let's go to our observer camera mode. So if you're in a player camera, you can Alt-C out, or you can use your camera toggle camera to get out so that you can fly around. And we're just going to go over the basic terrain editing tools here. So let's go up to Editors, Terrain Editor, and you'll notice that the first thing you notice that the GUI has changed significantly. As I move my cursor around over the terrain, we can see the brush and what it is that the brush will be affecting. And over here on the left are the different types of tools that I have for the terrain. The default is this one, which allows you to grab and push and pull the terrain, which can be pretty helpful. We can change our brush size and the type of brush that we're using up here at the top in the brush menu. But I'm going to show you the basic tools that we have here. The grab terrain is the one that I just showed you, which I'm going to go to a larger brush. And the grab terrain will allow me to literally grab and push and pull the terrain. As I push up, it'll move up, down will move down, which can be very helpful for for using a terrain. Some people find this very intuitive. It's a little bit more like sculpting if you're more of a traditional artist. I prefer to use these ones, which is raise height and lower height. I think those are pretty self-explanatory. Go for a smaller brush and kind of sculpt the terrain. I'm going to move around to an area that isn't as modified already. And I can raise things up, or I can lower them. You can see very quickly you can get some pretty interesting topology going on. Sometimes you get some very rough edges doing stuff like this, in which case you may be interested in using the smooth tool. I'm going to go to just a slightly larger brush, and the smooth tool is going to do exactly what it says. It's going to smooth out the rough edges. One of the things that I love very much about Torque is the ability to just go in as the player character and run up a ridge and say, you know what, I think I'd like to add more of a clear path here that isn't as cavernous, and go in with the smooth tool and smooth that out. If it gets a little bit too smooth, I may think that that doesn't really have as much variety as I would like it to have. We have the ability to paint in some noise. This will do pretty much exactly what you would expect. It's just gonna, you have to be kind of gentle with this one, in my opinion. Paint in some noise into the terrain. We also have flatten, which will kind of take the average of the area there. You can see if I grab at an area that's very low, it will take the average height of that area and flatten it out for the brush. It's very good for trying to lay out paths for the character, but you can see it can give you some very, very rough geometry, which of course the smooth tool comes in handy for. So there's a lot of different ways that you can work with this, and I'm going to allow you to work with it for a bit. Set height is my mortal enemy. I'll show you what the defaults do with set height, so you can have an idea of why I always try to not use it. A couple that are a little bit odd is clear terrain for new users. Clear terrain will actually paint out a hole in the terrain, and this is for if you want to have a cave and you have something built underneath it. I'm going to go ahead and jump into it to show you how that is an instance in which you might want to drop the player at the camera. That happens a lot if you're a little bit careless, and sometimes if you're doing some what's what I'm looking for, procedural terrain editing, you can come up with some empty spaces. And if you want to get rid of that, the last tool here is Restore Terrain, which will just paint that back in. So we can see it's now fixed. So there's a couple things that you can do, and I'm going to give you plenty of time to work, as much time as you want, actually, because, you know, you get to work on this as much as you want. But let's go back to editors and go to the object editor, and let's put some things in our world so that we've got other things with which to work. I'm going to drop the camera at the player so that I know I can put some things around here that he'll be able to see. And the easiest type of shape to drop in is called a TS static. We'll talk about the differences in the shapes a little bit later on. So up here under the scene tree, again, make sure you're in the object editor. We're going to go up and make sure that we're in our scene tree over here and open the library tab, the meshes tab, and I'm going to go into the art folder, shapes, and let's drop in a tree. So I'm going to go to trees, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get down close to the ground and double click on Oak 2, and that will drop this tree into the world. You can see right now I have the move tool, so I can grab any of these handles and move the tree to where it needs to be, or where I think it would look best. It's pretty straightforward. So in order to be able to modify these objects, we should go over what it is that we're going to be able to do with them. But before I do that, I want to show you a couple different ways that you can select objects. If I click nowhere, I will have the tree not selected anymore. If I click on it again, we'll see I have my move widget here, and it has the borders of a small single pixel white cube around it. I can do the same for the character. I can drag, select, and I've got the character. So whatever it is I have selected, its attributes will be shown in the inspector here as long as I'm in the object editor. So I can change the attributes of this tree if I click on the tree, and this is the scale of the tree in X, Y, and Z, and if I want it to be like just some ridiculous size, I can put in, I can just type in variables that I would, or I'm sorry, values that I would like to use for the tree, or maybe I want it to be really short, fat, and I can get a little short. It's almost like a weeping willow now. Okay, so that's one of the ways that we can modify things. Of course, that's not the most intuitive way to do things. So this is our move tool, and it is up here in this toolbox. This is move. This is the select tool. This will just allow me to select things, so that way I can change its attributes the way that I just did, but I can't grab any of these axes and move it. So in order to do that, I need to use the move tool. That makes sense. In order to move something, you need to use the move tool. The next tool is the rotate tool. So once I have an object selected and I go to the rotate tool, I can grab any of the axes and rotate it along any of those. So maybe this tree is kind of coming out at an angle here. And then I have the scale tool, which will allow me to interactively scale. The keyboard shortcuts for these is select is 1, move is 2, rotate is 3, and scale is 4. For those of you who are used to using 3D modeling programs or animation programs, people get used to using the QWER keys, QWER, but obviously W is used to move, so that's a good cue to help you remember that it's 1 through 4. So let's drop some things in here more than just the tree. What we're going to do is populate this area with some rocks. We're going to do that by using what's called a shape replicator, which will take a shape and allow us to populate an area with that shape.